Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and today I became one of the first 10 or so battlers in the world to reach Veteran in Season 21 of Go Battle League. In this video, I'm going to showcase the team that I used to get there, and importantly, I'm going to be going over the specific matchup knowledge that allowed this team to perform as well as it did. The team is a familiar one. It's my Shadow Golurk, Shadow Drapion Miltank team. I'm not going to be showcasing every battle from the climb. Instead, I'm going to try and showcase as many unique leads as I possibly can to show how I play them out. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches and let's take a look at my veteran run. Hopping into the first match, leading Shadow Golurk into Malamar, and what I've learned since I used this team last is that Shadow Golurk straight up wins the 2s versus Malamar straight Shadow Punch. So, whereas before I would oftentimes throw a Shadow Punch, get a shield, and switch out, I'm just going to stay in because this is a winning lead. The Psy Waves do massively add up over time, but I will exit this matchup in an awkward health range for my opponent, as Malamar leads almost always have poisons in the back that have very little fast move pressure into the Golurk. Opponent is going to switch out and make a catch onto Galarian Weezing. Shadow Punch is going to do some solid damage. I'm going to re-bank some energy and now send in the Shadow Drapion. They can make a Play Rough or an Overheat, but either one is survivable. They go for the Play Rough, and I'm going to farm up and throw right before Play Rough number 2. They actually CMP time me here, which tells me that this is only going to be a Brutal Swing. Brutal Swing, not particularly threatening, especially after they've lowered their attack by 2 stages, so that does very little damage, and I'm able to secure the knockout. I do have a little bit of residual energy for whatever's in the back, and it is revealed to be Tentacruel. So I will fire off the Crunch. I don't want to concede a farm down, so now I can just send in Miltank. My goal with Miltank here is to always have residual energy, so if I see the Malamar switch in, which I'm expecting after the Acid Spray, I can click this Body Slam and pressure my opponent into giving up a shield. They need this energy. My defense is -2. They want to land this super effective superpower, but look how bulky Miltank is. It tanks the move. I let myself get as low as possible because I don't want to give my opponent any farm and fire off the Body Slam, but it turns out the switch timer's actually up, so I can just bring in the Golurk and I have back-to-back Shadow Punches. Golurk is by far the most flexible Mud Slapper in the entire meta because its offensive coverage with its charge moves, Ghost and Fighting, is the exact same coverage that Annihilate has. We move to the next match, Shadow Golurk versus Guzzlord. Another tricky lead, but we'll see how I like to play it out. Typically, I will play the 1s as the Golurk, so I'm going to apply pressure with the threat of a Dynamic Punch that is going to grab a shield from my opponent, and now I'm going to look to farm up and attempt to catch out of this onto the Drapion. Drapion doesn't have a great matchup against the Guzzlord, but I've done enough damage where, honestly, this is very manageable. They bank a massive amount of energy on the Guzzlord to send in Tentacruel, and this is honestly terrific for me, as my Drapion does very, very well here. They got some nice Dragon Tail damage, but they did not do enough to put it into Poison Jab plus Scald range. So I will get to fire off the back-to-back Crunches. It is going to be a CMP tie, but a Scald will not be enough to knock me out. My goal as the Drapion is now to get myself as low as possible. They're very unlikely to shield the Tentacruel, so I want to give whatever they bring in as little farm as possible. So I will go for the Crunch, picking up the knockout. They bring in Talonflame, which is just a strict mistake on their part, as if they brought in the Guzzlord, they wouldn't have had to shield or take that damage, and since they brought in the Talon, I actually get to land an Aqua Tail. Any move from Talonflame will do more than a move from Guzzlord, so I will commit the shield. There's the Brave Bird, and Miltank is just much too healthy for this Guzzlord to deal with. Guzzlord is going to get to fire off a Crunch, and Miltank just does not care about that damage whatsoever. I'm going to fire off the Body Slam bait. They end up calling the bait, but now I can bring in the Golurk. My opponent should always no-shield here, and they do, trying to set up a win con with Talonflame farm, but Talonflame only has a fly here. They need one more Incinerate for a Brave Bird, and they're not going to get there, so we're able to take the win. We pick up a good lead in the next match, Shadow Golurk versus Pangoro. Shadow Golurk does win the 1 shield versus Pangoro straight Shadow Punch, with the caveat, as long as the Pangoro doesn't Night Slash boost. Night Slash does a ton of damage, but that's very okay for me. I'm just going to look to Mud Slap it into a range where I can deliver a knockout with a Shadow Punch. Opponent goes for a snipe with a Drift Blim, but I get to hold on to my energy and send in the Miltank, and Miltank just absolutely destroys the hopes and dreams of every single Drift Blim that it encounters. Miltank is monstrously bulky. On top of that, it's consistently hitting for super effective damage with both Rollout and Ice Beam. I do think that Ice Beam is a must on Miltank. I personally run Body Slam for pacing purposes. Some people who run this team do run Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt, of course, allows you a much better matchup against Pokemon like Tentacruel, but it does mean your pacing is a lot slower. But Ice Beam is a must, because Ice Beam on Miltank is the main thing you're going to use to neutralize Zygarde if you see it with the team. They are going to go for the Icy Wind. I'm going to look to overfarm as much as I can with the Miltank and pick up a knockout with the Ice Beam. My energy here is heavily debuffed, so I would love to pivot out. My opponent should be dry on Pangoro, so I can send in the Drapion, and even though I'll be one turn behind due to the one turn switch, I will still outpace by a turn, making the Aqua Tail before they make the close combat. Opponent farms up quite a bit, but they only have 8 Karate Chops, so I can always shield here. They go for the close combat. In the back is going to be Clefable, and at this point, I should just be in a completely winning position. I get to fire off an Aqua Tail. That doesn't do a ton of damage, but at this point, this is purely just to burn the switch timer. So I fire off back-to-back Aqua Tails, I switch into the Golurk, and I have the back-to-back Shadow Punches. Now, I could throw both, but it's actually better for me if I don't. The reason being is I can't give Pangoro farm. I now get to send in the Drapion. They're only at a Swift. That's not going to do nearly enough damage. And to get rid of the Drapion, Pangoro will have to close combat. And if they close combat, I can just win the game with the Body Slam that I have stored on the Miltank. So Night Slash will not be enough to deliver a knockout. Opponent realized that was their play, was hoping that the Night Slash KO'd, but it didn't, and were able to take the win. Hopping into the next match, Shadow Golurk versus Clefable. Now this is a little bit of an uncomfortable matchup, purely based on the fact that Clefables love to Swift bait Golurk. And as the Golurk, Moonblast doesn't quite one-shot, but it nearly does, so it's very tough to try and call that bait. Unfortunately, I end up shielding a Swift, and now I'm shielding a Moonblast, so I'm just double shielding in the lead. I'm saying if I have to go down 2 shields, I'm going to get as much energy as I possibly can on the Golurk, because again, Golurk's charge attack energy is absolutely unwallable. Opponent sends in Feraligatr. I'm going to fire off the Shadow Punch, and this will inflict a ton of damage onto the Feraligatr. I'm able to get a shield back, and now there's a switch out into Drapion. They're going to meet me with a Hydro Cannon. This will do a lot of damage, but that's very okay. In the back is going to be Annihilate, and if I get a Crunch debuff here, I basically auto win the game on the spot. Crunch does not get the debuff, and that's actually bad, because this next Crunch will not KO. If I got the debuff, I could have forced a shield and KO'd with a Shadow Punch, but now there's an Annihilate with a close combat loaded, and there's only one win con. It's sending in the Miltank to absorb a close combat. Annihilate has very high attack. Close combat's an amazing move, but look at Miltank. What an absolute champ. Tanking that move like it's nothing. In comes Feraligatr, and now I just have to get to any combination of 2 Body Slams and a Shadow Punch, and the game will be over. Opponent ends up shielding the first. Now, I do win the charge attack priority tie over Feraligatr, so I could potentially stay in, but instead, I'll just wait until they're in the middle of their Shadow Claw, snipe with the Golurk, Shadow Punch will KO, and even though, honestly, I played out the lead very poorly and I went down 2 shields, we were able to claw our way back and get the win. Shadow Golurk versus Shadow Feraligatr, not a good lead. I'm going to save switch into the Drapion. Opponent responds with Gliscor. Gliscor is a new meta threat this season, and Gliscor, specifically for both the Golurk and the Drapion, is difficult to deal with. I'm farming up a ton of energy, and basically, if you see a Gliscor, you have to get a shield call right. Here, I call the bait, I get hit with the nuke, and that's probably just game over. Gliscor, if you see it on the lead or as a counter swap, is probably going to be a low percentage chance of winning, but this team does very well into basically everything that isn't Gliscor, so just try and win the Gliscor games that you can, but realistically it's going to be pretty tough. And at this point, Miltank can do many things, but is highly unlikely to be able to 1v2. My opponent does bring in Feraligatr, which does give me a little bit of hope. Basically, my win con here is it's a flyer that has to be very weak to ice. So maybe like a Dragonite in the back or something like that. That would potentially be winnable. But odds are, once I get rid of the Feraligatr, they're probably going to send in something that I'm type neutral against. And at that point, I will just immediately resign because there's not going to be a way for me to win that game. I fire off the Body Slam. Opponent does end up shielding. That does give me a little bit of hope. But realistically, I still think it's highly unlikely that I'm able to pull off this win. I will fire off another Body Slam at the Feraligatr. Feraligatr is going to let that through. They are going to switch at the last second. It's Clefable, and the moment I see it, I can resign the match as that's not a winning endgame. Good lead in the next match, Shadow Golurk versus Shadow Drapion. Opponent save switches into Guzzlord. I'm going to throw 4 Mud Slaps and switch into the Miltank as they fire off their energy. Energy advantage on Golurk is always going to be strong because, again, due to that ghost fighting offensive duo being basically uncounterable, your energy is always going to be able to hit something for quite a bit of damage. And now I have Miltank into Guzzlord, which is a dominant matchup for the Miltank. The Mud Slaps put it into Ice Beam range. Opponent is going to win the cap tie, but look how bulky XL Miltank is. I still don't have to shield. So they're forced to give up both their shields or give up switch and a shield. The correct play for them is to go down both shields and just try and make a play for swap, but Shadow Drapion up 2 shields is just way too good. I can bring in the Golurk, throw 3 Mud Slaps, and win the CMP tie with a Dynamic Punch, neutralizing their energy. In the back, they have Galarian Moltres, but this should just be a win for the Shadow Drapion. Moltres makes a very nice catch, switching out as they make the Brave Bird and catching onto their own Drapion. An important thing for me to learn in this matchup is who wins the CMP tie. And I didn't see a sneak, so it looks like I win the CMP tie. The opponent did farm up to 5 there, so they will be 3 off the Aqua Tail. A potential lose con for me is that it was a coin flip and they win the next coin flip. So I'm just going to throw 2 to guarantee that it's not going to be a coin flip, and then fire off this Aqua Tail. Aqua Tail is going to deliver a knockout. For my opponent, they just have to start spamming out Ancient Powers and hope they get maybe a double boost. I think that's what they would need to pull off the win. They don't get the boost the first time, which is great, and I just need to land some damage before they're able to potentially boost. So the Aqua Tail is going to connect. I'm going to be committing the final shield. They're not quite in a range where Aqua Tail will knock them out. They do get an Ancient Power boost, but realistically, they needed that boost on the first one to get the win. Aqua Tail won't KO, but quick switch into the Golurk, and they're low enough that even at +1 defense, a resisted Shadow Punch will be able to knock Moltres out of the sky and take the win. Shadow Golurk versus Clefable. The last one Swift baited me, and honestly, that felt terrible. So I think I'm actually going to risk it here. This is a tough call to make, but I hate shielding Swifts, and I get it right. Let's go. Clefable in absolute shambles. Clefable is such a beast if it's able to successfully bait, but if you call a Swift bait, then suddenly Clefable is just absolutely robbed of all of its power. Clefable, are they really willing to bait me again? I say no, and I get it right. So now, getting the shield calls right, that's a comfortable 1 shield win for Golurk. In comes Gastrodon. I farm up to the double Shadow Punch, but I know I'm not getting both moves, as the Mud Slap that sneaks would KO me, so instead I go for the Dynamic Punch, which does a ton of damage, and now my backline, which is pretty soft to Gastrodon, is going to be fine into Gastrodon, because Gastro took so much damage. I'm farming up a ton with the Miltank. They just go for a Body Slam. That's super okay. I'm very fine tanking a Body Slam. I was just going to throw the Body Slam before they made Earth Power number 2. And my opponent, realizing that, just went for a little bit of chip. Body Slam will deliver a knockout. In the back is Shadow Drapion, and this game is instantly over, as Ice Beam will generate too much of a health disparity that my opponent cannot win. They realize this, and the moment I bring in my own Drapion, they will concede instantly. Shadow Golurk into Tentacruel, amazingly good lead. They safe switch Malamar, and again, I can safely farm up to a Shadow Punch and then bring in the Drapion, because they're going to be 1 turn behind due to the switch in, so I have a very safe banking of a Shadow Punch, and then I can bring in the hard counter to Malamar, which is Drapion. Even after the foul play bait, a superpower at full power will not be able to knock me out. So I am very, very happy to no-shield this next move. I did get a crunch debuff. It doesn't really do anything for me. They actually go for another foul play there, so they are looking to potentially set up some farm for themselves. The Aqua Tail is going to connect, and now in comes the Tentacruel. Now, Tentacruel is going to get a huge farm down. 2 crunches don't KO. They're going to exit with a lot of energy, and this is where the decision to not just bring in the Drapion instantly and to bank that Shadow Punch is so valuable. Because if I just switched instantly, then my opponent could have potentially forced 2 shields from the Golurk, whereas now I can force a shield first. Giving up 2 shields feels a lot better if you've already forced 1 shield from your opponent. I did end up throwing on alignment there. Giving them a free jab, to me, isn't a massive issue, as they can make 2 Scalds anyway, but I'm very happy to double shield, and even if it is something that beats Golurk in the back, I have Miltank, and the Golurk Miltank core is very difficult to break, unless your name is something like Virizion. In the back, it is going to be the Galarian Moltres, and this is just a one endgame for me. In the Great League, against a lot of the normal type rollout users, Moltres can actually sucker punch down the rollout user into Brave Bird range. But this is the Ultra League. Miltank is way too bulky. Opponent is going to be firing off their energy here. They go for an Ancient Power. That is not going to be enough to KO. They're now, they actually get a boost. They get a boost on that. That means the Brave Bird KOs, but I can bring in the Golurk. They try and catch. They're unable to do so, and now I can just knock them out with a Shadow Punch. So Golurk doing a lot of knockouts on flying types with Shadow Punch, which is very nice to see. We move to the next match, leading Shadow Golurk into Galarian Weezing. Now, this is a bit awkward if they stay in. They save switch into Feraligatr, and again, this is very important. Feraligatr save switch, you do 3 Mud Slaps and then bring in the Miltank. The reason being is that this Miltank is not on Thunderbolt, and if you do 3 Mud Slaps and switch, not only do you have an energy lead on the Golurk, but the 3 Mud Slaps perfectly puts it into rollout plus double Body Slam range. So it just sets up your Miltank for success, and you're one off a Shadow Punch on the Golurk. Here, my opponent did actually end up shielding the first. I undertap here just to try and get some damage. My opponent ends up double shielding for switch advantage, and they let me get another Body Slam. They're giving up 2 shields to save this energy. I can just snipe the energy with the Golurk, so now I've lost switch, but they just lost 2 Hydro Cannons, and that should basically be unrecoverable for them. It's now Moltres versus the Golurk. I land Dynamic Punch. I can't quite get to my Shadow Punch, but now I can just bring in the Shadow Drapion, and I'm always going to be shielding here. Moltres is going to bait with the Ancient Power. I'm farming up quite a bit, looking to pick up a knockout with an Aqua Tail. This will be close. Can the Moltres hang on here? Aqua Tail does not KO. I try for the snipe. I'm unable to get it. Back in comes the Weezing. Weezing is going to be met with an Ice Beam. Ice Beam, honestly, doesn't do much to that Weezing. Losing switch advantage did make this game a lot more complicated than it had to be, but we still should be able to emerge victorious. They are going to full send that Overheat. That does quite a bit of damage, and I will be at the back-to-back Aqua Tails on the Drapion. I realistically just want to have a move banked at all times, so that way if they send in the Moltres, then I can just knock them out. After they Overheat, they should switch here, so I'm just going to click the Aqua Tail, anticipating the switch in. There's the Moltres. Moltres will get knocked out of the sky by Aqua Tail, and then they can bring in the Weezing, but they would need an Overheat, and they can't get to a third one. Hopping into the next match, this is a terrible lead. Shadow Golurk for Shadow Drapion, very tough to win against. I save switch into the Drapion. Opponent is going to respond with Gastrodon, and this started poorly, and it's going even worse. I fire off the Crunch. I do get a defense drop, which is nice, and that actually spooks my opponent into throwing energy. They are going to full send the Earth Power. That does quite a bit of damage. I'm going to send in the Golurk, and Golurk is just going to look for massive farm. I try and cap tie them, but I got 1 turn bring-in lag, so I'm not actually able to cap tie them, and instead I'm forced to go down a shield. That's unfortunate. The good news is 2 Shadow Punches will cleanly KO. So I will be able to get the shield back from the Dragonite, but having that 1 turn bring-in lag now on Android is incredibly frustrating. I get to fire off Shadow Punch number 2. That is going to be no shielded. In comes Miltank. In the back is Feraligatr, and this is a pretty playable endgame for me, as Miltank does beat Feraligatr, but the tough thing is going to be I don't know if I have enough of an energy lead to be able to fully sweep this endgame. I am going to be firing off the Body Slam. That is going to be shielded by my opponent. They're firing off another Hydro Cannon, and I will use the final shield of the match. My opponent's shield in the first is honestly great. They respected a potential Thunderbolt that I do not have. They're not quite in a range where 2 slams will KO, so I'm going to need to pull magic out of a hat here. They're 1 off. If I throw a rollout, they're throwing in the middle, so I wait, switch, and get the catch onto Golurk. The Gambit is successful, and now I have to prepare for an immediate Dragonite switch in, but they don't have enough energy. I'm able to get the Body Slam. Body Slam KOs the Dragonite. In comes Feraligatr. Feraligatr gets outpaced by 1 singular turn. So with a devastating late game catch, we're able to flip the script and take a win. As we see here, this is claiming the 5-0 set that I had. Overall, I went 16-4 with the team. The sets were non-consecutive, but in the sets that I played with the team, it performed amazingly well. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that this kind of more detailed breakdown of the team proves to be valuable for people who are looking to emulate the team overall. If you have any questions of how to play specific matchups, I'm more than happy to answer them in the comments down below. But I really tried to cut out games where there were repeat leads, just to try and show as many different kinds of leads as possible to show how I like to play them out. But in a lot of situations, if it's going to be a terrible lead, Shadow Drapion is just an unbelievably good safe switch overall, and Miltank just proves to be a really good core pairing for that Golurk. If you guys are enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.